We have to, when Renee Crown sits down, we can all sit down. It is a high honor, but also a real great personal pleasure to welcome Penny Pritzker, a friend of the Aspen Institute, back to the Aspen Institute. Penny, welcome.
Thank you.
Commerce Secretary Pritzker.
Thank you.
Secretary Pritzker has worked with us in many ways and forms on skills to the workplace, community colleges. So it's great to see you in your new role, totally thriving. And I thought to myself, you all know Secretary Pritzker's background, but I thought to myself, what makes her really talented for this role? And I realized not only do you run marathons, you do triathlons. Is this the secret?
I don't know about that. It keeps me healthy at least.
Tell me, how many have you done?
Triathlons?
Yeah.
I don't know. Brian would know better. I bet we've done 20, 25. Yeah.
No wonder I'm not Commerce Secretary. I get it. It's an amazingly good day on the Commerce Secretary
Absolutely.
front. Unemployment down to 6.1%, surprising everybody in the jobs numbers announced this morning. Usually when they do that, they say, but you look underneath the numbers, it's not so good. But the more I looked underneath, the more good it is.
No, the numbers are really good. 288,000 jobs created by the private sector. So for all of you in the room, thank you very much for your good hard work. And they revised up the numbers for both April and May. I think May is over 304,000 jobs created in May. So this is really fantastic news. Obviously, there was a lot of concern about GDP in the first quarter, which was, we saw a dip in exports a bit in the first quarter and inventory acquisitions not grow, and the weather being a huge problem. So this is great news. And frankly, I think really underscores how we're feeling about the economy, which is very positive.
I noticed that the Dow shot through 17,000 for the first time this morning, way above it. Are we really now in a period where we can feel that the economy is booming again?
Well, I don't know about booming because I think it's a real balance that we have to think about. But I think that the United States sits in a very good position relative to the global economy. We've got, what I see around the world is a real interest in investing in the United States. And the reason is because of some really basic fundamentals. Start with our strong commitment to rule of law, our intellectual property protections, the amount of money we're investing in R&D, the quality of our universities, our low cost and abundant energy. And you add on top of that the ingenuity of the American workforce. And the United States is looking very good. And I'm seeing one of the programs we run at the Department of Commerce is something called Select USA, where we work with foreign companies that want to invest in the U.S., and there is enormous interest.
Give me some examples of people coming back or investing back.
Well, you have a company called Sasol that is putting in an $18 billion plant in Louisiana, and what's exciting about that is it's a South African company, and one of the things that they're committed to is not just developing the plant, but also developing the workforce in that region. And so they're an example of a company that's making a huge commitment. BMW, I was down in South Carolina, just made a multi-billion-dollar commitment to expand their plant in South Carolina. And these companies are very committed to not just doing manufacturing or growing their business here, but also investing in their communities. And so this is good for America.
How much is this being driven by energy, abundant energy sources coming online?
I think you cannot discount energy at all. It's a very, very important factor in the equation. But you also have to look at, I think that global supply chains are being rationalized and looking at how do I make production closer to my customer. And as you see the growth in the Western Hemisphere and the potential here, that's a big part of it. And so, you know, there's just, and don't underestimate the challenges that you can face in other parts of the world around your intellectual property protection.
Mm-hmm. With all of this going well, there's still a perception that the Obama administration is not friendly to business. You're probably one of the few business, very successful business people to be in a high position. And yet you have a good program called Open for Business. Tell me about that and tell me what you're doing to dispel the idea that the administration is not open for business?
So when I took this position, I came to Washington with one thing, which was a sign. You remember the old Main Street sign that you'd hang on the front door of your shop, open for business. And I hung the sign on the door of my office so that whether it was a foreign head of state or another secretary within the administration or a business leader or the person who does the cleaning of our offices, but there was a uniform understanding, including among the workforce at Commerce, that America is open for business. And that's been the attitude that we brought to the Department of Commerce. In terms of the business agenda, I think that the president gets a bit of a bum rap. If you look at the business agenda that we're aware of, the focus on how do we get more infrastructure spending, more investment in infrastructure, how do we get an immigration bill done, how do we deal with corporate tax reform, and we need to get our trade deals done. The president and the administration are 1,000% behind these efforts. And so there's a lot of commonality between the agenda that I hear from business leaders and what the administration's business agenda is. So I think we're in a much better place. And this it really is consistent with the job that the president asked me to do when he asked me to take this position, which he said, I want you to build a bridge with the business community, and I want you to make sure that the voice of the business community is heard throughout the administration. And then I want you to be part of my economic team. And oh, by the way, you have a department of 47,000 people. You better, make sure that that's running right. But the focus was really on making sure that the voice of business is heard throughout the administration and particularly in the economic policy agenda. And it doesn't mean that we win every argument, but I would say that the point of view of the business community is being resoundingly heard. And the good news is I'm not the only business person who's making that point. You have a real alignment there between Jason Furman, who's at Council of Economic Advisors, Jeff Zients, who runs the National Economic Council, myself, our U.S. Trade Rep, Mike Froman, and Jack Lew. So it's a good team, and we're making our presence felt. In terms of the Department of Commerce and the role that I'm playing in a lot of areas where commerce has not been active, we've been in the conversations about how to react to the Snowden disclosures. We've been in the conversations about what to do with Ukraine and Russia. And these are places where the Commerce Department had not been present and where the voice of business had not been heard as loudly as it's being heard
Let's
today.
drill down on both those. How bad were the NSA revelations for American business overseas?
Well, it has had a terrible effect. From the standpoint of estimates are about $35 billion of negative effect on American businesses. And so this is a real problem. The obvious example, of course, are our cloud computing companies and the lack of trust. So our job now is we have to rebuild that trust. A big opportunity is the work that we're doing through the Commerce Department and the US-EU safe harbor rules. Which are an opportunity for us not to lose that. That's a really, really important construct that allows data to flow freely back and forth. For someone who's been in real estate, one of the challenges of this job is really the breadth of things that we're being called to get involved in and the number of things that you need to learn about. I mean, net neutrality being another one, in terms of the implications for business and for the internet. And one of the things in the Commerce Department sits the national NTIA. Under NTIA, we do the digital policy, a lot of the digital policy development, as well as we control the spectrum. So if spectrum then is made for the private sector, the FCC auctions it off and regulates it. But we basically control the map of spectrum.
So what can you do through the NTIA to make it so that there's more competition getting broadband to my home?
That's a real challenge, and it's something that we're very focused on, which is the fact that the internet service providers, there's really an oligopoly that exists there. And so
And does that oligopoly hurt innovation?
well, one of the things that we're focused on, and take, for example, in net neutrality, is the point that we need to make sure that innovators can have equal access to getting their innovations to the marketplace, through the ISPs, through the last mile, to your home.
But is that easier done by regulation or encouraging more competitors in the space?
You have to consider both. You need to make sure that regulation is not impeding innovation, and that's a big issue that, given the current lawsuits that have existed that could cause real problems in that area. But what you need to do, what we're very focused on, is keeping the internet open, free, and that the small innovator in their garage or in their living room who's starting up a new company has as much ability to get their product to market as Google does or Facebook does. And that's a real challenge, to make sure you navigate that if that's your intention.
So does Commerce now get a seat at the table on things like a Comcast-Time Warner merger, those type of things, where Commerce used to not be involved in those discussions?
That's really Department of Justice. Okay. That's not really where we would get. I mean, sometimes we get asked our opinion, but at the end, those decisions really sit.
You're talking so much about driving innovation. What have you done to drive an innovative entrepreneurial economy?
Well, it's really exciting what we're doing in terms of innovation. First of all, we're very focused on a skilled workforce, and what can we do to make sure that we have the workforce of the future. And we've worked with the Department of Commerce has made a skilled workforce a priority for commerce, even though we don't give away any grants. But we very much partnered with the National Economic Council and have made sure that the grants that the Department of Labor gives out are supporting the idea that all training needs to be business-led and job-driven. What does that mean? That means that if you're going to win a grant from the federal government, you're a community college, we want you to have a local business partner with those programs, and we also want you to have an industry partner so that the programs and the education that you're developing can be recognized nationally, and that a credential that an individual going through your program is portable across the United States. This is work we began at the Aspen Institute.
For which, thank you.
Skills for America's Future. It's now in policy, embedded in the grants that are being given. Or there's a support for, there's a $150 million grant available now to support apprenticeships. We're very much trying to increase the number of apprenticeships. 87% of people who go through an apprenticeship program end up with a job. If you want to summarize the policy,
wow.
The secretary...
Wait, absorb that.
87% of people who go through an apprenticeship end up with a job. And what we're trying to do is expand apprenticeships beyond just the trades, but also into IT, into the healthcare sector, into areas where there's enormous job need. And if you want to summarize the policy, the Secretary of Labor puts it best, and when he says we can no longer afford to just train and pray. So skills is one area where we're doing things. Skills is one area
Tom Perez is an Aspen fellow, so that's where he gets his linguistic ability. Yeah.
I need to be an Aspen fellow. I'm not
Bingo,
quite so.
You're one.
So linguistically, he's very good at that, better than I am. But another area is we have the President's Ambassadors for Global Entrepreneurship. When the President Obama gave his speech in 2009 in Cairo, he had a real recognition that we in the United States need to help other countries create new businesses that will create jobs in those countries. And one of the things that we do better than any other country in the world is support entrepreneurship. We have the laws in place, whether there are laws that encourage you to start a business or there are laws that allow your businesses to fail and you not to end up in jail or it was some other kind of punitive outcome. We also have an entrepreneurial ecosystem that starts with you can develop an idea and then develop it into a business plan and into an entity that could be eligible for financing. We have places where you can go for financing, whether it's angel financing or various rounds of venture capital or on Wall Street. And then we have your ability to ultimately grow your business and take it around the world. Those kinds of ecosystems and those kinds of laws don't exist in many of the countries where we're seeing enormous challenges. So the president's recognition is that we have an ability to take this around the world as an exporting capacity and capacity building. So he named 11 PAGE members, which are well-known household name entrepreneurs like Tory Burch or Reid Hoffman, who started LinkedIn, or Daphne Kohler, who started Coursera, or Hamdi, who started Chobani. Mm-hmm. And we have 11 members, and what's really great is 5 are women and 6 are men, so we have a great gender balance. And we have a great product balance from tech to retail
Yogurt.
goods. And these folks, like Nina Vaca is one of our ambassadors, went with me to Ghana. She did 2 days of working with Ghanaian entrepreneurs to help them and inspiring them, but also giving them advice as to how to proceed. This is a fantastic opportunity for the United States.
You know, it seems like you're pioneering a very big idea here, which is that America's power in the world comes not just from its military might and from its diplomacy, but the Commerce Department adds a third leg, which is economic diplomacy.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in it, that we need to add a third leg to our diplomatic stool, and that economic diplomacy is that leg. I gave a speech at CSIS about a month ago on this issue, and basically the idea is that if we at the Department of Commerce and we in the government partner with the private sector around the world, that we can spread free and fair and open commerce and trade globally, and greater transparency in that whole effort. I mean, there's obviously needs to be rules and trade agreements, but there's much more that we need to do to support all of that. And that's really where I think the Commerce Department has an enormous opportunity. We have relationships with thousands and thousands of companies around this country. And when I show up in a country and I meet with the government and I talk about, from my private sector experience, what I would look for in a country that I'm looking to invest in, it really resonates. But then when I do it not only as Commerce Secretary with my own personal experience, but also sitting with CEOs from small, medium, and large companies, not just our large companies, but all size businesses, it says, look, here's what our folks need in order to invest in your countries. And what I'm finding is we are being embraced. In fact, there's a real demand around the world, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in Hanoi, whether it's in Rangoon or Napiado, for more American business presence. They recognize that American business brings with it a set of transparency, a commitment to their employees that is a global standard, and a commitment to investing locally and investing in communities locally. And they really want to see more of that.
Hearing between the lines, you say that, and it contrasts with the way China may do it.
China is very present out there, and what I'm hearing from the leaders of these governments is we need more balance. We need more of your economic presence here, and help us to help you become more present here. And I keep saying to the leaders, well, then you have to help me help you by looking at your laws and the way that you do business, such that American business can successfully under, with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, et cetera, be able to invest. And I'm also talked to the leaders, and this is at the highest levels in these countries, about the fact that a business commitment is not a 2-year commitment or a 3-year commitment. These are decades-long or centuries-long commitments. And so there needs to be stability, too, in a sense that we can rely upon that as governments change over, that this is going to be a place that you're going to want to be present as a business.
A couple days ago here at Ideas Fest, former Secretary of the Treasury, Larry Summers, got into a discussion and almost a debate with Steve Rattner and a few others about whether we may be in what was called a neo-Luddite moment, where the advances of technology are going to undermine jobs for the first time maybe in human history. I mean, they worried about it in the Industrial Revolution, that it was going to put people out of work, but it didn't really happen. But now, former Secretary Summers said, you can actually see it in the numbers, that there are fewer people who are going to be working. Do you believe that?
No. I think the jobs are different, and I think the skill set that you need is different. And therefore, it becomes a real issue of not just workforce training, but fundamentally our education system. The jobs are going to require you to work with machines. If you go and look at a modern factory today, the job of the human being and the job of the machine, you're working side by side. And in fact, these are, imagine you're no longer lifting something, but a machine is helping you move something that's heavy. But the job is now of a programmer, a problem solver, and often a coach, right, if you're running a factory floor. And so, I mean, for the first time in 10 years, we've seen manufacturing jobs and manufacturing output in the United States grow. This is a huge opportunity for us. But the person working in today's factory is, as someone said to me, our factories are no longer dark, dank, and dangerous. These are, places that look like operating rooms, and you've got to be computer savvy in order to work in these places.
One of the disagreements also this week at Ideas Fest is two people you know quite well, Drew Faust, the president of Harvard, and Arne Duncan, to some extent, the Secretary of Education, on just what you've been talking about, which is whether we reorient our education system, K through 12, to community college, and maybe even universities, to be outcome-based, so it's providing skills for the workforce, or whether education should remain a broader, more liberal arts endeavor. How do you balance those two?
Well, I think the point you made is right about balance, right? You can't have all of one or all of the other. I think you need a balance. And also, there isn't one solution for every individual. Mm-hmm. There is the person who, for a variety of reasons, let's assume you take people of equal capacity, but their circumstances may be that they can't go on to four-year college. They need to be work-ready out of high school, but have the ability to get stackable credentials that they can work towards an associate's degree and a bachelor's degree. And so I absolutely think we need to reorient our K-12. We need to, for example, make manufacturing more real for more young people, and the opportunities in STEM fields more real for more young people. What does that mean? That means in 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Because if you don't do the math, and if you're not studying the math, and if you're not learning those basic skills at that point, it's too late by the time you graduate high school. There's too much remediation. You need to be learning basic math and technology and science capacity early enough and building upon that so that you have the opportunity for these jobs.
Give me some examples then of how you, both working with the Aspen Institute before you went in office and now in office as Commerce Secretary, have tried to improve the skills for the American workforce pipeline.
Well, what we're really doing is we're saying businesses have to be the leaders. You can no longer wait for the education system to deliver. You've got to step in with your local community college and your high schools and with your local government and say, here's what we need. Here's the kind of workforce that we're going to need, not only today, but coming up. And so that's clear. And then the second thing is to say that the credentialing, and so we've been working with the Business Roundtable with 21 associations in different sectors of our economy to create a set of credentials that are nationally recognized so that someone can get a credential and it's portable, it's recognized, and it's valuable. Because you can't afford anymore, this idea that everyone in America is going to get a $50,000 a year college education is not, that we have to come up with other alternatives. And there's enormous opportunity online. I mean, I'm quite excited by what the Coursera's and the edX's of the world are going to be able to do in terms of education. I mean, they're at the beginning of figuring it out, but there's a lot of opportunity there. So we're working with all of them to figure out, you know, new modus operandi. And the good news is the Secretary of Labor, the Secretary of Ed, and me, the three of us are working closely together on this issue. It's no longer everybody's in their silo. You can't afford to do that anymore.
You know, there are two people you wouldn't know. T. Martin, who you should know, she runs Commander's Palace Restaurant in New Orleans, working with Scott Cowan, who, you know, he just stepped down as President Tulane, to create a new community college, a 21st century type community college in New Orleans based on culinary and hospitality skills, because our community colleges have drifted away sometimes from really doing some skills-based things. How important is the role of community colleges in this?
The world of community colleges is extremely important. This is the place. I mean, in Chicago, we have 120,000 kids and young people in our community colleges. And that is the place you go for the average American who is seeking to gain skills. And unfortunately, I think the statistics are something like 93% of the people showing up at community college need remediation from high school. In other words, they have not gotten what we would call a decent high school education. So they are fundamental. But this is the workforce of the future that is going through our community colleges.
Explain what you and Mayor Emanuel are doing to reconfigure community colleges in Chicago then.
Well, I'm not going to take credit for that, but I would say what Mayor Emanuel is trying to do is again, have the business community engage with the city colleges to say whether it's in I think they've picked, it started with a strategic plan in Chicago, where Chicago identified 6 or 7 strategic areas of growth, from logistics to hospitality to healthcare. It doesn't matter, I won't go into the others. And then the point is the community colleges, each of the community colleges has picked one of those areas to specialize in, and then business leaders from Chicago and the greater surround are partnering with the community college to make sure that that training is valuable to, you know, and so that the folks coming out of those programs are actually job ready. So, and this is what we need to do. And one of the things, you know, Walter, as long as I've got you, you know, pigeonholed here, one of the things that we want to do is now there are real success stories around the United States where the private sector is working with local government and with the community colleges and the universities to do successful workforce training in certain sectors. We need now to create convenings where the folks in South Carolina are meeting with the folks in Wisconsin, are meeting with the folks in Chicago and the folks on the West Coast, so they can share best practices around these sectors. And this is something that, you know, is a real
opportunity. Is Josh Weiner here? Are you standing? We have our community college program, thanks partly to you before you came. And we are trying with Josh Weiner and Ross Weiner, our people working in education institute, to try to do that. How do you bring to scale what's working in community college with the community college prize that you helped us figure out?
Exactly. Well, it's
You mentioned just a moment ago technology, Coursera types of things. We're watching that work where people at the high end take the circuits course or the electrical engineering course for MIT or Stanford or Harvard, and maybe even the Greek hero from Professor Nagy at Harvard. That doesn't yet seem to have been applied to skills to the workforce. How do you do that?
But it's going to be. It's going to be. If you talk to Daphne Kohler at Coursera, she would say that's and they think actually their customer is business, that they're going to be creating online programs because you have more and more global businesses. They need to train and want similar standards around the world. That's where they think their customer is going to be. And so I see that coming.
I've been working on this book about how innovation happens, and one thing that struck me is something you said earlier, is that partly it's a partnership of humans and machines, not machines replacing us, that is the future of innovation. And secondly, in places where that works, there's a sense of collaboration that came starting with Intel, of these big open workspaces where Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore were just sitting right in the middle. You went to Facebook and you saw such a thing, and I think you probably went back to the Herbert Hoover building, which lives up to its name, which is not a place that, having been there, that looks like an open workspace, innovative space. How important is space for this collaboration?
I think space is extremely important, and this has been a pet peeve of mine since I arrived. And one of the things that we've done is our building, we're in a 1.9 million square foot building that's horizontal. So it's so in some respects it's marvelous, and in other respects it's just vast. And it hasn't been renovated since 1960, and so you can just use your imagination what the interior looks like. It does not look like the Commerce Department of the 21st century in terms of workspace. But one of the things that I'm doing is working with the GSA and the Office of Management and Budget to say, how do we go about this? We're actually in the middle of a renovation that I have slowed down because I think we're going in the wrong direction of the space that we're creating, and so we're going to step back and take lessons from some of the great companies around the world to help us rethink what should the Commerce Department of the 21st century for the United States of America look like. And I'll get back to you when I've got that figured out.
Immigration, how bad is it that we haven't been able to get?
This is terrible. I mean, we have both a moral obligation to deal with the 11 million undocumented people living in our country, but we also have a real business opportunity that we're foregoing. Estimates are that immigration reform bill that was passed in the Senate would add $1.4 trillion to our economy. And so we're giving all of that up. And these are statistics I'm sure people in this room are familiar with, but just to remind us, in the immigration bill, it includes increase in the EB-5 visas, increase in the H-1B visas. It staples a green card to anybody who's an immigrant who's getting a master's or a PhD in any of the STEM fields. And just to put in mind the statistics, greater than 50% of the students in America who are getting a master's or a PhD in the STEM fields are immigrants. So we are educating these folks and then inviting them to leave. And it's crazy. It's just not smart, in any level. And I'm not even getting into the politics of it.
Since you're not getting into the politics of it, what can you do without having a bill passed?
Well, I think the president is exploring all of his opportunities in terms of executive action. But there'll be a limit. Let's face it, executive action is not the same as legislation. And I'll just give you another statistic that I learned this morning. So they call it the Congress of Inaction, I think, right now. To put it in proportion, they called 1948's Congress a Congress of Inaction. And that year they passed 900 bills. That session. This session to date, we've passed 121 bills. So there really is, it's a problem. The basic functioning, it doesn't mean it will stop, but there's a limit to what you can do without legislation. On other areas, like infrastructure investment, we cannot afford to let the transportation bill just lapse. 700,000 jobs in America depend on that bill, and let alone the supply chain that all of you use for your businesses. Whether it's roads, bridges, broadband, all of that is important investment. It's crazy that we're not making these investments. And it reduces the capacity of the United States' ability to both innovate and to get our goods to market.
Another place, though, where we're having inaction, and it's not the Republicans' fault necessarily, it's sometimes the Democrats' fault, is in trade bills. Shouldn't we have a better, more robust export and trade policy? So we are negotiating two major trade bills right now. TPP, which is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a negotiation that includes Japan and Mexico and Vietnam. It includes basically 40% of the world's GDP. And the goal is to create a high standard trade agreement. And what does that mean? That's a trade agreement that addresses things that didn't exist when we did NAFTA. State-owned enterprises and how they behave. The issues of labor and labor standards, environment. What are the environmental rules and the environmental arbitrage that's going on around the world that we're all paying for in one form or another. Intellectual property protections.
both from the technology side and the pharmaceutical side. And I could go on and on. Then we're also negotiating with the Europeans the transatlantic partnership agreement. In order to get both of those bills ultimately passed, we need to pass something called Trade Promotion Authority. Trade Promotion Authority says then that Congress, once an agreement is agreed to among the parties, that Congress will just vote up or down as opposed to amending various sections. You could just imagine that, 535 people amending a document that you've negotiated.
This is a treaty that's been negotiated
right,
with many
exactly.
countries.
It's, that's all you can do is up or down. And it's really important. Imagine being in a negotiation with 12 countries, forget 12 parties, 12 countries, you come to an agreement. It's very hard to get to that agreement if it's questioned whether we have the authority to actually pass such an agreement. So that's the task at hand. But this is really important, and I think the thing to keep in mind about these trade agreements is if we don't set the standards for trade in the 21st century around the world, and if you do both TPP and TTIP, that will affect 65% of the world's GDP. If we don't set the standards, our competitors are going to do it, and it's going to be a very different trade world that we're in.
Our competitors meaning China?
Absolutely.
So what about exports? What are you doing as the administration to increase exports?
Well, we have our National Export Initiative, which we just
And you can add in the Ex-Im Bank issue if you want.
Happy to talk about it. On our National Export Initiative, we're focused on how do we increase exports around the world. And one of the challenges, just to show you how important it is for our own GDP, they think, or the statistics show that in the first quarter, it was a drop in exports that was a significant contributor to the drop in GDP to negative 2.9% in the first quarter. So this is very important. 11.3 million Americans have jobs solely because of exports, solely supported by exports. So this is enormously important at every level of the economy. What we're doing is we have something called the U.S. Export Assistance Center at the Department of Commerce. It's like the best kept secret in the United States. We have 100 offices around the United States in the Department of Commerce, and what we do is if you have a good or service that you want to sell around the world, we'll help you figure out what markets you're competitive in, and then our foreign commercial services officers in those markets will help you navigate how to bring your good or service into that marketplace. So we're really a service organization supporting small, medium, and large-sized businesses across the world to help them bring in their goods and services around the world. So we're closely engaged with businesses on that. On the Ex-Im Bank, this is crazy. What's being proposed, the abolishment of the Ex-Im Bank. Ex-Im, you can like or dislike the Ex-Im Bank. You can have lots of feelings about it. But let's just get to the facts. There are 60 Ex-Im banks. 60 countries around the world have Ex-Im banks. It's a tool. It's a tool you use to help your companies be competitive. So the competitive landscape has Ex-Im as a tool that they're using. Ours is less funded than most, even at the proposed funding level. So we're already at a disadvantage from that standpoint, but we have a more robust private sector financing, so that's okay. But so why would you get rid of that tool? The tool also services, I think it's something like 85 to 90% of their customers are small and medium-sized businesses. Mm-hmm. So it's this idea that it's just all about large business is not true. But of course, as you might imagine, a large business is going to use more capital than a small business. So if you look at it from a capital standpoint, of course the large businesses are getting more capital. But the point is, who are you servicing? And then the third is, it adds $1 billion to the Treasury every year. So it's profitable. So I don't get the issue.
Amazing. One of the things, speaking of exports, that both you, the Commerce Department, and the administration have done somewhat quietly, but I think really good, is to allow more export of oil and gas. Is that right?
That's an interesting question. So liquid natural gas, LNG falls under the Department of Energy, and we just announced a new process to streamline the ability to get the right to export. You know, you can already export LNG to our free trade partners. The issue is exporting to our non-free trade partners. So that process is being streamlined. There's a new study that's being done because the old study that was done based on the amount of volume of liquid natural gas was that there was a limit to how much we should export before it would hurt domestic productivity and domestic output, which we don't want to do. And so they're going to do a new study because, frankly, what we thought about what was our available capacity in the United States 2 or 3 years ago is different than today.
You mean because of unconventional sources, fracking and everything else?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's liquid natural gas. Oil, crude oil, falls under the Department of Commerce. And right now, we do not have a change in policy, despite what you've read in the newspaper. We do not have a change in policy. However, what is going on is that because of unconventional sources, and for those of you who are lawyers in the room, you'll enjoy this. What is the definition of crude oil versus what is the definition of a distilled or refined product? That is something that we have to now look into more carefully and better understand the implications of this. And it's because technology is advancing faster than the existing regulations.
Okay, but let me push on the larger 30,000-foot thing. Vladimir Putin is keeping his foot on the neck of everybody from Poland to Ukraine because he can export oil and natural gas. The Middle East, it's a bit of a problem there. Venezuela, a bit of a problem. Why aren't we going full bore to increase our exports of oil and our production of oil and our exports of natural gas and LNG and distillates? Why are we, isn't that good for our foreign policy? Isn't it good for our exports? Isn't it good for our economy?
I think I think it's a mistake to think there isn't a serious conversation going on within the administration about what we should do and figure out the right policy.
Is that the way of saying yes? No.
No, it's not a way of saying, you've jumped to, we should export more.
Yeah.
The question is, what is the right exports and what is the right amount of exports? And we do not have right now we have in place a policy about oil exports. Is that, there's a policy question, but there's a definitional question at all. So we have to spend time, an interagency process to figure that out, which is going to occur.
Do you think we should export more?
Well, I think that we should understand the facts before I can answer that question. Because what you don't want to do is hurt American business, right? Mm-hmm. But the factors that you take into account, you talk about, are absolutely part of the equation, right? There's a geopolitical challenge, there's an economic challenge, and this is the same thing that I was saying before. You can't make these decisions just looking at it from an economic standpoint, a strategic standpoint, or a diplomatic standpoint. You have to look at this in a more holistic fashion, and that's one of the things that we're trying to make sure it happens.
Raise your hands, questions, thoughts. Bingo, right here. You can shout or wait for this orange microphone that seems to be wending its way past Bill Nitze.
Hello, my name is Loretta McCarthy, and I run an angel investment group that invests in women-led companies. One of the accomplishments of the Obama administration that you didn't mention is the Jobs Act.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, now that we're 2 years in, beyond the passage of the Jobs Act, what you could comment on in terms of what's been accomplished, how you're feeling about it.
Well, the Jobs Act is a terrific act that really went back and looked at all kinds of laws and regulations that were impeding the formation of new business. And I would say you're seeing 20% of new jobs in the United States come from startups. So we need to encourage startups in this country. And I'm very excited about what's happening. I was with Steve Case was really the person who was the energy behind the Jobs Act, both bringing to the attention of the administration the opportunity as well as championing it through legislation a couple of years ago. And I went on a bus tour with him, and it is so exciting what is happening in the entrepreneurial world in this country. I mean, it's exciting what's happening outside the U.S., but it's really exciting here. He created a bus tour called The Rise of the Rest, which is he went to Detroit, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and Nashville to celebrate and highlight what's happening in startups in these cities, not cities like Austin, Denver, and New York or in the Silicon Valley, but what's happening in terms of startups there. And it is extraordinary what's going on. And for the part of the Department of Commerce, we support the creation. We have money to support the creation of incubators. And then we help work with startup manufacturing businesses in terms of our manufacturing extension partnerships, which is a consulting effort that we have to work with small and medium-sized manufacturers to make sure they're using best practices. But it's really exciting what's going on there, and something we're really, happy with.
How important is the startups economy to the whole American economy?
Well, as I just said, it's 20% of new job creation. But I think it's also, innovation is an extraordinarily important thing. And I think we have to recognize we're never going to be the lowest cost provider in the world, writ large. We may have some sectors where we are, but writ large, that is not the place of the United States. And so innovation becomes extremely important. And one of the things that I'm actually championing one piece of legislation right now, and wish me luck, but there's something called the National Network of Manufacturing Innovation, which is the president has started 4 pilots where the private sector comes together with universities and community colleges and the supply chain around areas of 3D printing, composite materials, the digital manufacturing, and other areas. These are, and he's going to do 4 more pilots. But this is where the federal government puts up about $70 million as a catalyst for all these organizations to come together around an area that requires pre-competitive innovation, where no single business can do the innovation all by themselves and afford to do it. And it is enormously exciting what's happening, but it's really important. This is the work that will lead to the products that you will see 5, 7, and 10 years from now, where America will lead. And so it's really important that we continue to do this. And I talked to some of the leadership that have put together these consortia, and I said, why do you need the federal government? Because for the most part, the private sector with the local government and the universities and the community colleges are coming up with much more money than the one-to-one match that they're required to do to win these grants. They said, without the federal catalyst, we wouldn't do it. But the difference is if this legislation passed, and it has bipartisan support in both houses, is that the areas of focus will be driven by industry and not by the government. And right now, the areas of focus, because the way the funding works, come from the Department of Defense or the Department of Energy. And I really think that the private sector has ideas of areas of innovation that we ought to be focused on as well. So I'm
one of the great innovations of starting in 1945 that built America was Vannevar Bush and others that created a tripartite innovation system of government, universities, private industry. And that started to fall apart, but that's what you're trying to restore.
What we're trying to restore, and I think it's very fundamental to the future of the United States competitiveness, as is workforce training. I mean, you can't do one or the other. We have to do all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you're standing up and jumping. You must be excited. So is somebody in the way back. You get to go next, but yeah, the person with the mic there. Or just shout, yeah, standing up, yeah.
So, first of all, Secretary, thank you so much for your leadership and service. Really appreciate it. So we all know your background and that you're from one of the most accomplished families in the last 50 years in America. And presumably you would acknowledge that that's been helpful eventually in getting you to your position currently. Commerce creates wealth. So we also know that we're on the cusp of, if not already, at the greatest wealth sort of delta in global history. So what role and responsibilities, if any, does the Department of Commerce have in addressing that challenge?
Well, I think we have a very important role, and the way to address that challenge is to try and build from the bottom up, not try and squash from the top down. And that's the approach that we're taking, which is to try and build a skilled workforce so that there's opportunity, trying to support entrepreneurship so that if someone has an idea, they can get it from an idea to a business plan to something that gets funded that becomes a real business that can potentially export. Those are the kinds of places. Or to work with a young manufacturing organization to be successful. I think we have a real responsibility, but it's about, to me, building from the bottom up.
Way in the back, woman in green, yes.
Madam Secretary, I think we all appreciate all the constraints and the ramifications of what government decision makers have to do, but with regard to our strategic oil reserves, as you know, the administration has already started a test, and strategic oil reserves are primarily for national and strategic emergencies. And to find that we're already doing, quote, a test with 15 major oil companies to sell it, rather than using it and at least putting it on the table in some regard related to Ukraine and the Europeans who are dependent on Putin with a gas station. I wonder what kind of thoughts you have that we can, in fact, put this on the table as for a strategic energy purpose, which is what it was for, instead of for commercial sale near term, even if it doesn't go directly to Ukraine, but is on the table as part of our strength.
So I'm not going to comment specifically on the strategic oil reserves. What I would say is that the economic situation as it relates to the Ukraine and its reliance upon Russian energy is a huge part of the conversation about how we're trying to address the situation, which is, as you might imagine, very complex and very challenging given what you read in the newspaper. You're seeing how challenging it is and how to work to support Ukraine and at the same time deal with the challenges that are coming from their east. And one of the things we're doing at the Commerce Department is we're working very closely with my Ukrainian counterpart to begin to help them develop their economy and less reliance upon energy, as well as not less reliance on the Russian marketplace, but expanding their marketplace to include not just the Russian marketplace, but others, depending upon what Russia's going to allow to happen. But to think these aren't part of the strategic conversations, I think, is to underestimate the breadth of the way we're thinking about the problems.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, you have a mic there? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, right there. Mm-hmm.
Madam Secretary, what is the culture? What is the cultural, the economic impact of culture in America or in the world? I mean, is that being measured in any way? Is it being considered?
Yes, we just, and I wish I had the statistics, I can get them for you, but we just started evaluating the contribution of culture to GDP, and I think it's something like 3% of, I'm looking at Jim over here, 3% of GDP is the contribution of the cultural world. And so this for the very first time is it being included in the calculation of GDP.
Can I just follow up with that?
Actually,
What
we have
would
so
be-
many more hands. Make it real quick if you would.
Just what would be the impact if we actually took that seriously? Culture seriously, that is.
Yeah. Can we
Well,
do
I
more
think-
to make it?
I think the first thing is let's understand what it's doing, and then the second is, of course, highlighting its implications, which is something that we're doing, and we are raising the awareness of that.
That's yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. My question is about our returning vets. And I know from another year I was here that a lot of times the skills they get in the military are not accepted by our colleges. And I wondered, are they working on that?
Absolutely. It's a huge effort, both with business to make sure that we translate the skills that have been received when in the military to the way that businesses look at skills, as well as in the community colleges. It's a huge priority, and it's something that not only the First Lady has been working on, but also it's part of the Labor Department's major efforts, as well as the Department of Education.
Bill, are you standing up because you have a bad back or because you have a question? Okay, Bill Nitza.
Madam Secretary, the President's political opponents have taken the position that basically taxation and regulation is bad for job creation, bad for entrepreneurship, and bad for business in general. Now, I strongly disagree, but we could use some smarter taxation and smarter regulation. And, for example, I think we need a carbon tax, and I think we need a broader, more comprehensive corporate tax with fewer exemptions and lower rates. Now, my question is, how are you and Tom Donahue doing getting on the same page on this proposition?
Well, I think that, first of all, the president has been public and went public about a year ago in his belief that we need to lower the corporate tax rate and spread out the corporate tax rate and get rid of as many deductions as we have. So he wants to bring the corporate tax rate down to 28% and for manufacturing 25%. You know, you could quibble with the number, but it's directionally, and he appreciates the challenge that it's causing American businesses in terms of their competitiveness. Now the question is, and when the president lists his priorities in terms of legislation from an economic standpoint, his priorities are corporate tax reform, the trade agreements, immigration reform, and infrastructure investment. So it's a high priority. The question is what's doable given the challenges one faces on Capitol Hill.
Chamber of Commerce?
The Chamber of Commerce. So we're working closely with the Chamber of Commerce. You know, what I would say is the fundamental challenge as I see it, and this is that to get to a corporate tax rate that seems desirable has to be revenue neutral. In other words, we are not allowed to come up with ideas that are not revenue neutral. So for every reduction point, there's a cost. And I mean, I've sat there and looked at the charts, and then you get a list. Here are the deductions you get rid of. And I've been in meetings. You sit with a group of manufacturers and you say, well, the first thing that goes is accelerated depreciation, right? You cannot lower the tax rate without getting rid of accelerated depreciation. So there is for sure someone in this room who loves accelerated depreciation. I don't know who you are, and it doesn't really matter. The point is it's a math exercise. It's also a policy exercise. And so at some point, there will be people who don't like aspects of this. And so the challenge for Tom is he represents every American business. And so there's, you know, who's got more leverage and who's got more say is the challenge. But to get there, you ultimately need all the sectors to jump at once, because there's no doubt if each sector's lobbying organization decides, well, I don't like this and I'm not going to go for it, you know, people can kill bills. And so that's the big challenge to achieve the goal. The president supports it, you know, assuming that we can get some momentum behind it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wouldn't our companies in the United States become meaningfully more competitive if they were able to drop the health insurance costs?
Well, one of the good things that we're seeing out of the ACA bill, the healthcare bill, is that you've seen healthcare inflation really moderate to about 1% to 2%. So how we drop healthcare costs, sure, it would be, but we would be more competitive if all of our cost of doing business was lowered, and healthcare is a significant one. So one of the things we've seen, though, is this lowering of the inflation rate of healthcare, which is very positive.
I have a personal question.
Yes, sir.
What did you learn from your dad and your own experiences about the role of women in taking higher capacity in American business, which has been the major change in the past 20 years?
You know, I think one of the most exciting things that I see happening is the rise of American women throughout corporate America. But I also think what's extraordinarily exciting is the rise of American women in entrepreneurship. And the fact that
Because you were an entrepreneur, basically.
I had the best of both worlds. I think I was an entrepreneur in a large corporate environment. And so I had the backing of a large environment, but I could be entrepreneurial within it. And I don't underestimate how much that helped me and the success that I could have. And I'm, you know, and it's not just about me, we were a team as a family, and supported each other. And the way I looked at my opportunity was I didn't want to try and do what Tom was doing or what Nick was doing or what John was doing. I wanted to do something different and be additive as opposed to competitive within the process. I thought that was better for our dynamic. But I think that for women, you know, to see more and more, for the first time in my professional career, I am working in an environment where I think that 30 or 40% of the leadership are women. And it does change the dynamic when you're not just one or two women in the room. It absolutely allows for greater and stronger voice, and it is additive to the conversation. And I think that that's not true in corporate America today. If you go into the corporate boardroom, you're lucky if there's 3 women. And for the most part, you're lucky, you know, you'll see 1, maybe 2 women. And it's not enough. It's not enough. The diversity of a point of view, both gender and ethnicity, brings greater insight into the business opportunity. And I think that that's the thing that needs to be recognized more and more, and I think is being recognized. If you look at the changing demographic in this country, your customer is, I think women are responsible for something like 72% of all expenditures in the country. And so just with that, now of course, as John Nichols would say, you know, don't give me these macro facts, give it to me by sector and by decision. But, you know, it is, much of purchasing is done by women. So I don't care what business you're in, you're going to want to know that point of view. If you see a changing demographic, you know, if you're in the food business, what foods people want is changing with demographics. And so I think that boardrooms and corporate leadership is team, right? There's no one person that makes a business run. It's a team. And so those teams have to reflect the global diversity as well as ethnic and gender diversity.
And finally, bravo, thank you. And finally, what do you see are the really basic fundamental strengths of the American economy?
I think that our flexibility and our ingenuity are really, and our fundamental respect for rule of law and our protection of intellectual property protections are undergird the United States' ability to rebound. And I know there's tension, you know, when things go wrong, there's too much regulation or there's not enough regulation, you know, everybody's got their point of view about that. But fundamentally, I still think those things are in place. And I think it's why the United States is sitting in the position it is after, you know, a really horrific recession that took its real toll on, frankly, not many people in this room and a lot of other people in this country.
Madam Secretary, thank you very much.
Thank
That
you.
was awesome. Thank you. That was really good.